welcome to this podcast after a bit of a gap. I'm back with Ben Pinniger from BP Milling. We've got Ben on because it's sort of quite poignant with the time of year and the weather. There's hot weather at the minute. We're in like the middle of June. It's going to be 30 degrees tomorrow, and there's a chance of a storm the following day. So we just thought, obviously, with those conditions, there's a chance of an oxygen crash. So I thought we could just go over and cover a few bits and get it out there to try and give some pointers to people. So for fishery owners, what should they be looking for, Ben?
Yeah, so particularly lakes with an algal bloom, less such weedy lakes, more sort of lakes with a good algal bloom, like a green coloured water, or algal blooms can come in sort of a brown coloured form as well. So it's basically a single celled algae that all in the current weather circumstance we're having. There's going to be obviously very intense sunlight today. We're sat in like 26 degrees today, and then tomorrow's 30. So you're going to have that algae is going to be photosynthesizing and really sort of thriving and blowing out a load of oxygen today and tomorrow during the daylight hours. But then when we get this storm, basically those single-celled algae are going to effectively die. So they're going to then be absorbed by bacteria will start to break them down. So the warmer the water, so obviously today the water temperatures will be getting right up above sort of 25 degrees in some of the shallower lakes, and then with that those single-celled algae starting to die, you're going to get the aerobic bacteria breaking those algae cells down, and the activity of those bacteria is going to be using a lot of oxygen. So that's how you get your intense sort of boom in algae, and then you get this storm that we're forecasting the weekend, which is those algae cells are going to die and that bacterial processes are going to strip oxygen from the lake. So it's what you look out for as a fishery owner. If these are the exact sort of circumstances you look out for, is a period of intense UV sunlight, warm temperatures, and then followed by a thunderstorm. So that's what it's looking like we're going to get. So it's the perfect storm for fisheries, particularly with an algal bloom, particularly if you've got a high biomass of fish, and particularly if it's like sort of a real sort of high stock, shallow commercial lake is the sort of the perfect storm, really.
That was going to be one of my questions. Obviously, if there's a lake with more stock, are they at a higher risk, just I suppose, because more fish, there's less oxygen to go around?
So it's what we call the BOD, the biological oxygen demand. So that's the demand of the pond, which includes fish, bacteria, invertebrates, and the respiration of the weed and algae. They're all using oxygen, although the algae and weed we produce oxygen in the day, they're actually respirating and drawing oxygen out during the night. So this is the biological oxygen demand is going to be very high, and the ability of the water holds less oxygen during the warmer the water, the poorer its ability to hold oxygen effectively. So during the winter, this is less of an issue because the fish and everything are less active. The water's colder, so it's holding oxygen better, and the BOD's much lower. So at the moment you've got a very high BOD, so the more fish you've got, the more demand on oxygen from the fish, obviously, the more waste you're getting from the fish, and also the more ammonia is being produced by the fish and the food going in. So ammonia basically breaks down into nitrite and nitrate, which nitrate is feeding the algal bloom. So the more fish you've got, the more ammonia you've got, the more nitrate, and more fertiliser.
So it's not just a simple case of there's more oxygen demand from the fish, it's also that nitrate side of things as well. So it's almost like a double whammy of...
So it's basically, like I say, the shallower the lake, the closer the fish are to the substrate all the time. So you imagine in a 14-foot plus lake, all the fish today will be up in the top 2 foot, you'd imagine, wouldn't you? So whereas in a lake, say averaging 3 or 4 foot, they're going to be within inches of the lake beds, and some big fish certainly. So they're constantly disturbing the substrate. So the more substrate is disturbed, the more silt is disturbed, the more oxygen's getting into the silt, and more aerobic bacteria processes are going on, which again is more demanding of oxygen. So in the shallower the lake and the more fish you've got, that's basically, if you saw a lake today and it was pea soup green, I'd be worried about that on Saturday and Sunday when these storms come in, because that's telling you that you've got a real strong algal bloom which is potentially going to crash on the weekend. So that's what I'd be looking out for. And again, that the more fish you've got, the more feed they're having, the more demand there is on everything, and the more feed that goes in. But a lot of fisheries don't have an oxygen reading meter, so they don't know that what the oxygen is, say now. And you need to have your finger on the pulse of oxygen. If you haven't got an oxygen meter, you don't know what the oxygen's reading. Then, like if I went and took a reading today in like the high risk fisheries that I've said, like the pea soup, trapped again, but so yeah, if today you're getting a reading what we call super saturated, so if I dip the probe in the pond today, that's the what we call the oxygen probe, and tested the oxygen today in my ponds that have got an algal bloom, they'd be called super saturated, which is over 100% concentration of oxygen. So that means basically that the air holds between 7 and 8 milligrams per litre of oxygen in the atmosphere. So if my ponds are reading 200% saturation, then they'd be more like 16 milligrams per litre, which is the contribution from the algae and the weed. Obviously today we're getting real good photosynthesis, strong photosynthesis, so I'd imagine they would all be super saturated through the oxygen produced by the weed and the plants. So effectively you'll get oxygen diffusion from the atmosphere, which will only lift the oxygen to 100%, because you can't get obviously any more oxygen diffusing if it's not in a very high concentration in the air. So however the plants in the pond will be producing pure oxygen, so that's what lifts it to a higher concentration than what's in the air. So yeah, there's a lot to understand with oxygen.
What about the effect of wind? Because I read or heard someone mention about that, obviously about the wind causing like obviously peaks in the water, so it's effectively more surface area.
Yeah,
does that help?
right.
So if it's still, does that then add further if there's no wind at all going across the water?
Yeah, so like exactly that really. The more wind you've got on the water, the higher the surface area, because obviously you've got the waves, whereas if it's flat pan, your surface area is the acreage of the lake. So that's why we always encourage to open your lakes up to maximise the light and air exposure. So your nitrate level always wants to be being fed down. So what I mean by that is you always want sunlight hitting the water, so the nitrates that are available in your lake are constantly being fed on by the algae and the plants, so you need sunlight for them to do that. So then your nitrate availability should be at a more consistent level, whereas if you say you had a lake which is surrounded by trees, it's not getting much sunlight, you're going to get that nitrate peaking, sort of accumulating for weeks and weeks as the fish are, more ammonia is being converted into nitrate, but you've got nothing absorbing that nitrates because you haven't got the light coming in. So you'll get a very high level of nitrate, and then you might get a day where you might get sunlight hits it right and just a huge algal bloom, but then that'll crash quite quickly, so you can have sort of a bit of a boom and bust sort of situation again there. So we try and say by having your lakes consistently open to the light and air, you're going to get much more consistent algal bloom, because algal blooms are healthy at the end of the day. I did a video on this recently, which is I had looked quite in depth into algae and what it provides fish, and it was the protein content alone is a huge range, but something like 14% up to 60% protein in some algal blooms. And you've also got the omega-3 value of it, which we all, you have sort of omega-3 supplements which generally come from fish, like processed fish, and extracted for omega-3, but the fish are actually getting their omega-3 value from the algae, so they're basically the carrier of the omega-3. Whereas if we've got a natural algal bloom in our ponds, that's providing omega-3 for our fish, so we don't need to be feeding marine oils. If you've got a good algal bloom, in my opinion, the fish have got a good source of omega-3. But you can understand it you can imagine that fish are much easier to process for omega-3 than algae is. So for us, if we wanted an omega-3 supplement, it's easier and cheaper to have it from processed fish and extracted from fish, because if you imagine processing algae is a much lengthier process, I'd imagine, at a sort of manufacturing level.
Obviously you mentioned about we touched on like preventative measures. You said about obviously sort of having quite a clear sort of basically not loads of trees around the water. We'll carry on to that a bit in a minute, but obviously if we talk about, because obviously the plan is to release this podcast today, to get out in time to, to potentially help a few people, fishery owners and things, if there is this like sort of impending crash due. What can fishery owners do sort of now, like as soon as they hear this, or is it a bit too late? Is there anything they can do? I mean, you mentioned oxygen meter, obviously we'll link to that because you can supply people with them.
Yeah, I put a post up at the beginning of the week when I first heard it was forecast to try and push the oxygen. Sadly, I have like oxygen meters on the shelf all year until something like this comes along, and they sell overnight, so people do leave it last minute. But really, if you haven't got one, like obviously I won't be able to get one shipped now because I'm shipping tomorrow it's Friday tomorrow, isn't it? So your best thing to do is to get. I use a water pump, so a 3-inch Honda water pump, and I have that sucking water from the pond and just basically turning it over if I had low oxygen. So I'll be testing first light tomorrow, testing oxygen, and if there's any issues or if I'm at all worried that the algal bloom potentially might crash, then I'd have my water pump ready and set up, check it's running tomorrow, and then run it tomorrow night through the night, and just keep it running all weekend. And to do that, because normally these Honda pumps, they'll run, if you run them flat out, they might last 2 or 3 hours on a tank of fuel, but if you run them at tick over, drop the revs right down, they'll run for more like 8 hours, so that'll get you through the night. So yeah, that's what I'd be doing. But I also run it through, reduce it through a tube, so it's spreading the spray of water across the lake. So that's mobile because I haven't got power to my ponds, and a lot of fisheries owners don't. So that's something that you could have just ticking over, and it's a petrol water pump which is mobile. So
I hit pause as the truck goes past.
When I get up to rapid high, wherever you can hire tools and stuff from, I'd be going up there tomorrow. Ideally, you'd test your oxygen first light tomorrow, and if it's anything below sort of 3 or 4 milligrams per litre, then that's what I'd consider a lowish reading. It's not something I'd panic about. I wouldn't get, on a normal day, I wouldn't worry about getting pumps out. I'd probably just drop the feed ration 50%. However, if I had a reading, say at the peak sunlight hours of the day, say 2 or 3 in the afternoon, if I had the oxygen saturation was reading over, say, 150%, that's telling me that the algae is contributing heavily to the oxygen concentration in the pond. So that tells me I've got a high concentration of algae, and that's potentially going to crash. So on the weekend. So if I had over 150% saturation in some of my ponds, then I'd be keeping a very close eye on it this weekend.
So what about obviously the people that haven't managed to order a OxyGuard in time? Is there anything that would it make sense for them to do it just in case? Like sort of belt and braces. Obviously, if they haven't got a means of testing their oxygen levels in their water, would it be worth them just doing it just to be on the safe side?
I would,
getting a pump?
If it's particularly if anyone listening that falls into the category of a fishery which has got at the moment today has got a strong algal bloom, by that I mean sort of green water or very turbid coloured water. If they have a shallow lake, if they have a high stocking density, by that say over 100 pounds per acre of fish in weight, I would say that you sort of fall into the category of high risk. I'd say if you've got a healthy, if you've got a lot of weed, a lot of submerged weed, rooted weed, then they're less of an issue because those weeds are they're basically stealing the nitrate that the algae wants, so they're feeding off all the nitrate down. So I don't like rooted weed in my ponds because they're not as bioavailable to the fish as a single-celled algae system, but they're safer in like scenarios like we're going to get this weekend because your weed's not going to die and not going to be broken down by aerobic bacteria like the single-celled algae is. So you're not going to have that crash like you are with the single-celled algae system. But I still think there's more benefits to algae than there is to rooted weed. So I try and promote algae, but like I say, if you find yourself, if you're listening to me here and thinking, oh god, I'm worried this is still ticking all the right boxes for my fishery, then I'd be just for sort of peace of mind really, I'd be going and hiring a pump, or maybe 2 if you've got a big fishery and You know, because the only time, unfortunately, if you haven't got an oxygen meter, the only time you know when you've got low oxygen, it's almost too late when the fish start to show signs of respiratory distress. Say if they're gasping on the surface, mouthing at the surface, or gathering around the inlets of the pond or lake, then that means that your oxygen will be below 1 milligram per litre, which that's critical level, so that they won't last 24 hours in that. So this is the reason for buying an oxygen meter, and they're not cheap, but you know, like I say, you'd be able to find out this problem much sooner. And you'd be able to work out today whether you're at high risk or not. But yeah, those are the sort of clinical symptoms of low oxygen. But the issues with that as well is if the fish are in that level of oxygen for too long, they're obviously stressing, so they're producing more mucus, they're more lethargic, so these are all exactly what the parasites want. So then they get an added load of parasites, external parasites, latching onto the fish and causing further stress. So those are, with oxygen, it's one of them. It's
so as well, before that's kind
of by the side of the road.
The so that pump, would it be worth us sticking a link or a few links to where they're available, just for people, just in case they can't go and grab one tomorrow, like Friday?
Yeah, it's not a bad idea, but it's just going to be any of your local tool hire place, isn't it? Really,
is it straight? If someone's not used one before, is it straightforward to set up? I mean, do they need like extra hoses or tubes or anything?
No, you don't need much of a suction hose. I have mine on the side of the pond, and I've had it in the past. I've had very low oxygen, and I haven't got the luxury of having electric down at my ponds. So if you've got electric by the ponds, you can just buy an aerator. But then, so if I'd have the pump set up on the side of the pond. You've got like a rigid pipe, which is your suction hose, which goes into the pond and obviously sinks, and then you've got your lay flat pipe. I'd cut the lay flat pipe so it's sort of long enough just to shoot out over the pond again, over the suction hose. And some people think you want to shoot the water up in the air to try and maximise the surface area and the plunge of it going into the water. Whereas if it's in a critical, I've always thought that if you're in a critical sort of low oxygen read, if you're getting a reading below 1 milligrams per litre, I'd rather have the jet pushing out across the water, so it's pushing out parallel to the water, and sort of dipping in at 45 degrees, because then you're creating a flow then. So then that flow of water is going to be helping the fish in breathing. So you can imagine the fish is to breathe, it's got to pump its gill plate, pump water over the gills as quickly as it can to try and stay alive, to try and absorb as much oxygen from the water as it can. And by creating that flow, you're effectively doing what the gills are trying to do. You're pushing that water over the gills and trying to keep those fish alive. So that's what I tend to do, rather than blowing the water up in the air or spraying it too fine.
One thing I was going to mention as well, obviously, is feeding. What should people be still feeding their lakes, and with people that are out angling, what would you recommend?
I'd say probably half your feed ration for this weekend and today and tomorrow as well. I'd suggest cutting back on your feed ration, just because you don't want to be contributing to that biological oxygen demand. Obviously any food that goes in, the fish are going to need oxygen to digest, oxygen to be active and feeding, and there might be some lakes that haven't spawned yet that will be spawning this weekend, and that's all going to demand oxygen, which will put them off if there is low oxygen. But it's really down to the fishery manager to sort of police, really, and again, without an oxygen meter, you don't know what your oxygen reading is. It's difficult to do that, but as an angler, if you're fishing this weekend and you're fishing a lake with an algal bloom, then I would imagine the fishing to be pretty poor, because the algal bloom is probably going to be crashing. It's almost like, as well, they have the effect of the pressure as well, the air pressure. You've got high pressure now, which is effectively holding those dissolved gases in the pond, in the water. If we get a low pressure over the weekend with these storms, and that's effectively going to allow those gases to release into the atmosphere again. So the gases produced by the algae is going to have quite an impact on the oxygen. So that all coarse fish dislike any sort of, if it's not consistent, any inconsistency in the water quality, they're not going to like. So I'd imagine the fishing to be quite poor this weekend, particularly obviously if it's low oxygen. The fish don't really feed. You'll even notice below 3.5 milligrams per litre, I noticed the fish off the feed slightly.
Right.
That might sound a bit foreign to anglers, but normally over 4 milligrams per litre is healthy. The fish will act normally. You won't notice any differences. And even down to 1 milligram per litre, you don't really notice any changes in the behaviour. They might look a bit more lethargic, might be respirating a bit faster, pumping water over the gills a little bit faster, and on the surface in the richer oxygen. But if you're not noticing any gasping, you might just think they're basking on the surface, so you might try and get them to feed.
Right.
And by doing that, if they're not feeding, it shows that you're actually contributing to the problem. So say if you're putting a high protein, high oil diet in the water to try and entice them into feeding, the higher the protein, the more that's going to contribute to ammonia. That's going to break down to ammonia. So that's actually going to contribute to the problem as it breaks down. And even as the fish feed, they're going to be disturbing the substrate, getting oxygen into the silt. That's all using oxygen, and that allows aerobic bacteria to break down the silt, so they'll be using oxygen.
Right.
So it's a bit of, this time of year is very sort of a bit of a knife edge compared to the winter. In the winter, everything's pretty bulletproof. The fish are bulletproof, the water quality's sturdy, and the fish, they're much more consistent. Although not feeding, their metabolism might drop. Everything's much more consistent then. But the summer is quite the opposite. Everything's much more delicate. So, which is why I don't get too keen about fishing this time of year when it's this warm. You just know it can be a bit hot and cold, the fishing. I much prefer it in the sort of spring and the autumn when it sort of settles down a bit, and into the winter. But
yeah, and fishing more predictable, I suppose.
So if you're fishing this weekend, I'd probably bear that in mind. It's probably going to put a lot of people off fishing this weekend, but
right. But that's, like I say, it's not a bad thing. It sounds like they don't want to be under any extra stress.
That's it. Yeah, and I think if it is going to be raining like it's supposed to, then I don't think anyone will want to go anyway. So so really it's just being aware of what's happening with the water chemistry. When you're as an angler, you might sort of turn a blind eye to it and think, it's going to be overcast and raining, the fish might get their heads down. I don't think that'll be the case this weekend. I think it'll be, for a lot of places, just trying to get by. But again, I say that, but weedy lakes, I'd imagine the oxygen to be not stable, but it won't crash as hard as a lake with it's got a strong algal bloom.
Right.
That'd be sort of my only observation, I suppose, with that.
Okay.
But yeah, it's going to be sort of a funny weekend for a lot of fisheries, I think.
So just basically be alert.
Yeah.
For those that have got like an oxygen meter, is there any sort of literature or anything that they can go to where they know what the levels are? Is there like any decent written text that you can recommend?
I put a post up recently, but my post was on my own observations rather than by the book. Like I say, it's probably 5 years ago. Bit of a story there where I was working with Andrew on a lake up in the sort of north of the Cotswolds, up near him, near Morton in the Marsh, and I had these fish growing at home in my original pond, and they got up to sort of mid doubles, upper doubles, and they were feeding and growing really well. And then we had this scenario come in, and I thought, I can't stitch Andy up and not go to work. And I went to work, and when I got back to the farm, I picked off 17 fish. They all died, upper doubles, and they were big for me. Back then I was a youngster, and that was when you learn quite fast. And you see fish gasping, and you test your oxygen. You realise from then on, I was much more on the ball with oxygen, and it takes that to sort of be on the ball, because I think if there's any positivity to be taken from mortality like that, is that you had to go through that, because otherwise to sort of learn your lesson, and if you don't, then it's only a matter of time before you do and learn those lessons, and those are the teachings that you need to take, which will now serve me for a lifetime.
And I suppose
it's good
as
that I learned them then, I suppose. But
I know for a lot of people it's their livelihood as well, isn't it? If they are the owner of the water, that's their only income.
And I could observe, like, as the water, the oxygen from then on, when I got an oxygen meter and tested more regularly, the next time I had an oxygen drop, I was able to sort of monitor what the fish were doing at different readings, and that's really how I learnt what to look out for, and what levels, like what milligrams per litre fish do what. And that's how I've sort of So by going by the book, you can go by the book, but that's how I've sort of taught myself with oxygen, really. And when it gets to certain levels and people ring up and tell me what readings they've got and what they're observing, then should they be worried? But
okay, so that tractor's just passed. So, and earlier on we mentioned about sort of you briefly covered preventative measures. So let's say we didn't have this weekend, or it was the winter or the spring. What steps as a fishery owner or manager can they take to sort of safeguard or just almost mitigate risk as best they can from it happening? Like when these conditions do occur, what could they have done in the following the leading months up to it to
okay, so for more consistent water quality, like I've already said about the trees, dropping the trees. If you imagine your trees aren't only stealing sunlight and that constant UV sort of energy that you need for consistent photosynthesis and a consistent algal bloom, they're also contributing to your silt build-up. If you imagine the leaf fall on an individual tree, it's quite significant in some trees. So that would be the main thing for us is always removing tree cover. Although as an angler, you love that. It's quite nice and it's something to fish to and snag removal. But for fish progression, healthy fisheries, healthy water quality, I'd always remove that and try and, if you can, not the trees to get better, more sunlight penetration. Then you're going to have a more consistent algal bloom. You're going to have that nitrate level feeding down all the time. But the leaf fall and the contribution to the silt of the trees is it's going to have the opposite effect, in not only stealing sunlight but contributing to your silt build up. And the more silt you've got, the more bacteria action you've got breaking it down. And the other thing with silt, we've all been through it if you've been in waders. If you go through some beds of silt, you'll find that big gas bubbles coming up, and it's real black silt. That's what you're likely to get if you don't have your in sort of dark lakes where you've not got much sunlight penetration.
Right.
You get that really black gassy silt,
Yeah.
and that's basically anaerobic bacteria that can feed, break the silt down without oxygen. So that's the deeper layers of the silt. The anaerobic bacteria can work in that because they obviously don't need oxygen, but they actually produce that methane gas. So when you get that that really gassy silt that stinks of eggs and stuff, that's methane gas and carbon dioxide. So that's the bacteria we like are the aerobic bacteria that are the ones that steal the oxygen, but they they don't have that same methane and carbon dioxide gases that they produce, like the anaerobic bacteria. So it's a bit scientific if you're an angler listening to this, but for us the preventative measures would be replacing trees for plants. Obviously plants are much better at absorbing nitrate, and like I say, feeding that nitrate level down. The algae and weed are feeding that nitrate level down.
And what plants do you recommend for that?
So the marginal plants we use are generally sort of carex and iris. Yellow flag iris are always sort of nice yellow flower you get this time of year. Obviously that's beneficial from an ecological point of view. And then you've also got the carex, which is a real sort of, it spreads much more faster. It's easier to plant, easier to divide up. And you might find a small bed of carex. It's basically a sedge that grows along the margins, but it doesn't grow further out into the water than sort of 8 inches, I suppose, 8 inches of water. So it's not actually going to be invasive and growing out into the water and stealing water space. It's just going to stick to the margins, be a good buffer for nitrate and help feed down that nitrate level and provide a nice fringe, prevent erosion. It's good from a natural food point of view as well. The rooted structure in carex and flag iris is much more beneficial to the food chain than a big dirty great tree that's dropping tons of silt every autumn.
Right. What about removal of any invasive sort of plants or?
Yeah, like bulrush. Bulrush are pretty quick to steal water space. It's particularly sort of up to 3 foot depths, and they seem to be, I don't know why, but they seem to be a silt trap. If you go through a bed of bulrush, it's real black stinky silt that I mentioned, that anaerobic bacteria. I don't know what the link is there, but you find that it's a real sort of toxic silt trap when you go through some of them, particularly the long established beds. Some fish, if they're being visited by fish, you get sort of a harder substrate, but if they're not, they tend to get real silty and boggy and horrible and quite toxic to the lake, in my opinion. But I don't like them in my ponds. I try and strip them out if they try and emerge, then I'd be picking them off as they emerge, and they're quite easy to pick out. You get your hand under the root and they're linked, and you just follow the root along and lift them out. And yeah, any that are starting to sprout up out of the ground, I just give them a dot of spray on each one, a bit of glyphosate, and that's just keep them under control really, because they do take over shallow lakes and take up quite an area of water. And again, when the leaf stems are very tall, so when those stems die and they fold over, they're sort of basically putting a cap over the water and a lid on the water, so that's minimising the oxygen diffusion from the surface, and it's also making it very dark underwater and making it sort of a cold, dark environment under there. So to maintain our plants, we trim them every autumn and just rake out the leaves, so then you get nice sort of fresh growth in the spring, and it all grows up consistent and nice. And some anglers sort of might think it's a bit sort of, I don't know, golf course style, the way sort of we manage our ponds and how we cut the grass and cut the plants down. But for me, it's much more progressive environment for fish. I've covered it before on a podcast before, that how fish in these old pits, these gravel pits, how they became big, but they grow big in their early years, so they grew fast, and then as the lakes matured and no management was done, the trees grew up, stealing light and air, like I've covered just there, and it starts to have the opposite effect, and they don't progress as well. Whereas I think if you maintained the not the barren aesthetic as they were as original gravel pits, original gravel extractions, whatever, but maintained, you know, good sunlight exposure, good wind cover, exposure, then they would continue to grow into the later years as well. And I think that's where a lot of people think, oh, it's a strain, or it's I think it's more to do with the lake was in a real good state, a real productive lake when there's loads of light and air get into it. It warmed up quick and it was a new lake, whereas now there's trees and everything around it, and the fish have sort of slowed down growing. There is obviously an element of age to it, but I think even we've seen old fish drop in weight for years and years, and then as soon as you sort of change your management, they pack it on again back to their original weight. So it can be done. It's I think there's more to it than just strain. I think although it's not carpy, like I say, it's for me it's seeing what we can, keeping the fishery healthy and progressive state of the stock.
So mentioning stock there, what about sort of maintaining and monitoring stock levels? Because obviously it sounds like it's not just a case of like oxygen per fish, but it's all the things whether they're eating, and everything else that leads to it. So is that worth sort of investigating or keeping an eye on?
Yeah, so that is the other, not a downside, but once you create a healthy, productive environment, your fish will fill into that, that gap that you create. So if you've got a real healthy, productive fishery, your fish are going to thrive. So they're not only going to grow, but they're going to breed. So if you've got carp-only water, your carp will breed and the fry will come through, and then you'll have your biomass will explode and fill into that, basically to maximise the space that they've got. They will fill into it, and particularly if you say you manage your fishery like I've just explained how I do it, then your fry would grow really quickly and become sort of a large part of the biomass very quickly. So by biomass, that's your total weight of fish in the lake. So say if you had fry this year that hatched say in May, they could be up to 6 inches by the end of the year, but by the end of next year they could all be a pound. Although we've got cormorant predation and stuff to deal with, you can imagine there could be thousands of 1 pound carp that a massive part of that biomass. So if you're
very hungry, I suppose.
So they're not only using oxygen, but they also have a demand for food and everything else, and they're also attracting predation, which is going to stress other carp. Although the big carp aren't going to be too bothered by it, they're still going to have predators bombing around and carp around them. And obviously, more fish, the more ammonia you've got. So the more breakdown of ammonia to nitrate, like I already covered. So you can have more algae and weed growth. So if you haven't, without just carp, so a lot of venues are mixed species. So you wouldn't see any carp come through in lakes where you've got any sort of silvers or perch, because obviously perch are early spawners. So as soon as they've hatched, they're big enough to predate on the fry of the cypriniid species. So they tend to sort of dominate in productive waters. Perch you'll see come through, and silvers. Whereas the carp wouldn't really get a look in, because by the time the carp are spawned, they're normally lapped up by the silvers and perch.
Right.
But again, in weedier lakes, your carp wouldn't thrive as well. Your fry wouldn't survive so well, because they haven't got that food chain. Because if you've got weed, the weed is stealing the nitrates from the algae.
Right.
But the algae is basically the bottom of the food chain, which is fed on by plankton, by invertebrates, and your fish. So and your fry, sorry. So Daphnia is really sort of the prime food source. Daphnia and copepods for fry.
Right.
But if you haven't got sort of an algae system, then that'd be your first food for the fish. Is that algae, and like I say, the nutrient source of the algae is actually really beneficial for fry.
Right.
And we find in our ponds, if we've got a good algal bloom, the fry thrive much better than they do in a pond that's very weedy. And that's because they're basically submerged and marinating in that nutrient-rich water, which is the single-celled algae. Whereas in the weed, you've got all that weed is absorbing those nutrients, and that's tied up in the structure of the weed, so the fish aren't actually going to eat that weed, so there's no benefit to them.
Right.
Although there's invertebrates and dragonfly larvae and caddis and bits and bobs in there, they're almost too much of a large food item to the fish, for the fry, sorry. So they're not actually any benefit to the fish until they're consumed. So even the big fish, although there's nutrient around them, unless they actually eat it and physically digest it, then it's no benefit to them at all. Whereas algae is obviously being fed through them all the time, so it's constantly trickling nutrient through them. And that's why I think that those sort of style of fisheries, they are more productive, and the fish grow faster. Although it's not everyone's cup of tea from a fishing point of view. But big fish, I think, tend to thrive better in, once they are big, a bit of weed around them, they tend to sort of keep going.
Okay. So that's sort of three main areas we've touched on for like preventative, maintenance to sort of reduce the risk of an oxygen crash. Is there anything else? Not, is that the three main areas? Would you say?
I'd say it's open to what people want to hear, really. If they say there's a topic they want to see covered, but I think for now that's quite a topic that's very sort of now, isn't it? It's just very tomorrow, and the weekend will be an interesting time, and hopefully somebody's got some benefit from what we've covered there to hopefully prevent some mortality somewhere. If it's of value to anyone, it's worth doing, isn't it?
Yeah, so, definitely. And I'd say if anyone wants us to expand on any further sort of topics that we've covered or anything else, just let us know or comment on Instagram, and we can go from there.
Yeah.
Ben, thank you very much.
No worries. I do apologise for the tractor traffic interrupting for that.
That's fine.